Welcome, friends. I'm Dr. Carol. If you've been watching for a while, you know that there are places we go, topics we address that's just out there. No holds barred, no topic off limits, and we are having one of those conversations today. Today we're talking about the transgender challenges, issues, lies, truth. I have a fascinating guest. Walt Heyer is now in his 80s. He lived as a transgender woman for 8 years after having done all, the hormones, the surgery, then went back to identifying and living as a man. And we're going to be talking about his story and what redemption looked like for him. Walt has a passion to help others who are struggling with the challenges that you'll hear us talk about and who regret having entered the transgender world. You'll see in this conversation how Walt is very clear about what he says are lies and what the truth is and what his journey was like and how he works with people now. This is a much bigger issue than I think I had even realized until recently. And I am very honored that Walt is here to share his story and his perspective on this part of our culture and world right now, and what Jesus has to say about it. What does God, the redemption Jesus bring, how does that impact those who are struggling with these challenges around gender? And you will hear Walt's perspective that it really isn't gender. Stay open, listen to what Walt has to say, because I think you will find this very, very interesting. And I am so glad now to bring you Walt Heyer. Walt Heyer, it is an honor and a privilege to have you on the program. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. It'll be interesting, I'm sure.
Yes. Well, we are touching on something today that is a real hot topic today in our culture and world. It was not nearly so hot a topic when you were struggling with the issues that we're going to talk about today. For the people who might not be aware of you and your story, just share with us a bit.
Yeah. Well, it's a long story. It starts in 1944. And so, it's 79 years later. I'm 83. So, what happens is happened to me is happening to thousands of children, where a parent thinks it's either cute or fashionable or interesting or whatever it is they're thinking. They dress a boy up in girls' clothing and tell him how cute he looks and so forth, thinking that it's benign and harmless and so forth. But it isn't always either benign or harmless.
Yes.
And so in my case, Grandma said, "This is our little secret. Don't tell your parents." So she had the run of me for doing this with a purple dress that she made me for about 2.5 years before I took it home. And my parents found it. Then I could never go back to Grandma's house. But I think for the listener, it's important to know that that purple dress altered the way that I thought and felt about myself.
Wow.
So that's why I say it's not benign. I think parents forget that the brain is just developing in its early years at 4. And in fact, the brain isn't fully developed really until 25 to 30 years old.
Yep.
That's just factual data. And the last part of the brain that gets developed is that of consequences, understanding, all those sort of things. So, excuse me. So to do this to children, I just use the right words. It's child abuse. You don't dress up a kid in girls' clothes and tell him how cute he looks, because that is a way of destroying the image that he has of himself. Yes. We should be affirming a child in the way that God designed them and developed them to be. And the only thing that a parent can do by cross-dressing a child is either devalue who he is by putting him in a dress as a boy, dehumanize who he is by putting in a dress, or destroy the image he has of himself. So devalue, dehumanize, and destroy.
Wow.
That's what cross-dressing does. So should we be doing it? Absolutely not. It is not a game to be played, especially in the environment today where children are going to be going back to their childhood. As anybody who knows, childhood is a developmental time, critical developmental time. So let's not put things into their head that's going to affect them so that at 83 years old, they're on some kind of podcast talking about how they were harmed by it. So, 78, 79 years of effect, that should be enough information for anybody to go, we shouldn't be doing. There's really no necessity, is there, for cross-dressing a boy as a girl? None whatsoever. There's no purpose. There's no value in it. Somebody's getting something out of it, but the person who suffers is the one being dressed by the adult. So let's stop it, period. So, but that seed gets planted like it did in me. The dress disappeared. I couldn't go to grandma's house, but 2.5 years of this began the journey. And the journey then, my dad was frightened when he learned about the fact that grandma had been cross-dressing me, and scared him. I mean, we're talking 1946, 1947.
Yeah.
My dad's a police officer. He's an industrial salesman, nice guy, but he's scared to death. And how does he talk to his friends who have kids about his boy wearing a dress? And so it was troubling to him. So in his best effort, and I don't hate him for it, he did what he thought was right. He was trying to discipline me like a blacksmith would to hot iron with a hardwood floor plank, trying to man me up.
Wow.
But that was all he had. He had no other information. I mean, there was no data at the time. There were no cell phones. You couldn't jump on the internet and see how do you handle this. So he did the best he could. That was one part of the phase. And then his adopted brother, who was a teenager, thought because I was wearing a dress that I would be fair game to be sexually molested. So he started sexually molesting me. Now, the thing to learn isn't that I suffered all this abuse. It's that what caused the abuse was the purple dress.
Wow.
That was the cause. So without the purple dress, I wouldn't have been hit with a hardwood floor plank, and I wouldn't have been sexually molested. So this is why I call it abuse. It's child abuse. Stop it.
Yeah.
And I don't know why parents think it's cute. They almost get to the point now where they think, oh, I got a trans kid. They're like, I'm smarter than you. No, you're dumber than me if you're doing that, because it's not good for the child, and the child will suffer. So from there on, I was dealing with trauma. And there's a term for that. It's called adverse childhood experiences.
ACEs. ACEs.
Know your ACEs, baby, because there's a lot of them. And I can tell you that I've personally spoken with and worked with thousands of people who've been through the surgery and had the hormones. And every one of them suffered ACEs. Not one, not two, not three, but several.
I was going to ask you about that, Walt. You certainly suffered ACEs.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask you about how often do you believe that is correlated with individuals who have struggled with their gender like you did? Well, and you say everyone you've talked with.
Everyone who regretted the outcome.
Okay.
Who's written to Sex Change Regret, the HeyerInstitute.com, who came out the other side realizing that they were misdiagnosed, because the diagnosis is actually trauma. They needed a trauma therapist. They didn't need a gender therapist. They didn't need hormones, and they didn't need surgery. They needed somebody to deal with their trauma. And so the treatment for trauma is considerably different than giving somebody hormones and surgery.
Right.
And so these are, they're quite simple. I mean, I'm working with a case right now with a mother who's all upset with her son because he's identifying as a transgender at 23 years old. And I politely wrote back and said, well, tell me about his childhood. I'm guessing that he had some trauma going on. Tell me about it. Well, this guy had enormous amount of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was close to his grandmother who lived in the house. She died. Then somebody else came to the house. They died. These were all older people that were in the family. So there were 3 or 4 people in a row that came to live there, and they all died. That's
What's the little
trauma.
boy going to think? Exactly.
Right. You get there's and you know, I want people listening to this, and you're aware of this, but most people aren't. That if a child just feels unsafe in a house, they're traumatized. You don't have to hit them with a stick. You don't have to beat them up. You don't have to abuse them. All they have to do is perceive that they're in an unsafe place, and they're going to suffer trauma. People keep saying kids are resilient. No, they're not.
Mm.
You know, some of them do build resilience, but many of them don't. And we need to treat them all as if they're not going to be resilient against these things. So, yeah, 100% of the people who I work with, I actually have fun with it now, because when somebody writes me about their kid, I go, oh, okay, what happened to this one early in life? And so I write back and ask,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
get the answer either from the parent or the individual themselves. So, 100%.
Wow.
Yeah.
You came to adulthood, married, had a couple children,
Mhm.
and then as an adult, all this that was going on inside of you that had never been dealt with, you went through some big changes and then
Yeah.
regretted it. That part of the story. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I went to Dr. Paul Walker, who drafted the original WPATH standards of care. They were originally called the Harry Benjamin International Standards of Care. In the late 70s, 1979, he and some other doctors, Dr. Laub and some other doctors, went to San Diego and drafted the Harry Benjamin International Standards of Care. He was my doctor. He was the chairperson.
Wow.
He was considered the world leader in diagnosing and treating, quote, gender dysphoria. He diagnosed me with gender dysphoria in 1981 before it was ever in the DSM in 2013, because,
Yep.
you know, Harry Benjamin was using the term in 1973. I never had gender dysphoria. I've worked with thousands of people. I don't know one of them that have gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria, in my view, is probably one of the biggest false diagnoses there is, because once you lift the lid off of it, you find all these other things that went on. They were abused, they were abandoned, they were put in foster care. They had cancer and had a leg cut off. Their dad murdered their mom. Their dad's in jail. Mom's an alcoholic. Mom's you know, the list
Wow.
goes on. So this is not gender dysphoria. It's generalized dysphoria. There is dysphoria. That what we, in my view, need to do is get away from saying gender dysphoria. You have dysphoria, but what is the dysphoria about? Oh, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, loss, trauma, whatever. Yeah, we have dysphoria. It's just not specific to gender. But as long as they convince people that it's specific to gender, then they have them hooked on hormones and surgery, which they don't need.
Yeah.
So when people write me and they say, you know, I'm transgender, I transition, and I have gender dysphoria, I always write them back and say, well, you're not a transgender, you never transitioned, you don't have gender dysphoria. If you're going to work with me, we're going to have to tell the truth.
Interesting. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and the ones that write back, because I don't really, I get so much email and I have so much going on. I don't really care to do a dance with people who have all that other nonsense going on. But if people really want help and they're open, you know, I learned, I'm a recovering alcoholic, 37 years. People who are willing to get help, I can help them.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so people
Yes.
who are defiant against getting help, I can't help them. I'm not in the business of breaking down their defiance. I'll let that happen. And when they're done and they want me, I'll be there. But so, you know, when they hear that, they write back and go, that's very curious. What do you want to know? I said, I want to know about your childhood. And I always ask them this neat question. What caused you to not like who you are?
Yes.
And then I ask them the next one. Why do you want to erase who you are?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then why do you think you're going to be better off by cutting off body parts and taking hormones? Answer me those 3 questions and we'll have a discussion.
That's right to the heart of it. I think what you're talking about, Walt, is dysphoria. People are struggling. These the people you work with, and I talk with some too. Their pain is real. Their struggle is real.
Absolutely.
Hormones and surgery is not the answer. There is a different answer. Yes,
that's exactly right. And it's, it's just that simple. And people actually get very upset with me when I say it's not gender dysphoria. But here's the thing. I cannot help people if they're stuck on gender dysphoria because there's no place to go.
Wow.
Because you're locked into this ideology. I want to take them out of the ideology and place them where we can actually begin to lift up the lid and open up the box on what the real issue is, because it's not about gender. And I keep telling this is not about gender. If you're going to work with me, we're going to figure out what it's about, because it's not about gender. And 100% of the time we figure it out.
Wow. So for you, Walt, you had the hormones, you went through surgery, and that you write and you say, that didn't fix what was going on inside.
That's right.
You lived as a woman for 8 years. What changed to let you realize what's going on inside is still not dealt with? And how did you start to deal with what was going on inside?
Yeah, well, I wanted to become a psychologist, PhD. That was I wanted to have something to do, and so I started studying psychology at UC Santa Cruz, and started out with the alcohol drug side of it because I was an alcoholic, and then I started reading case studies about people who cross-dressed and had surgery, and I started running into all these new terminologies I'd never heard before, like separation anxiety. That was the first one. And I dug into that study, which was done at Cornell or something many years ago. And a boy whose mother died began cross-dressing and began taking hormones, doing the whole 9 yards. And they discovered after spending time with him in therapy that he did it to keep his mother alive.
Yeah.
Like that, my eyes got this big around. I go, wait a minute, that's not gender dysphoria. That's a whole different ballgame, right?
That's grief. That's traumatic grief.
Absolutely. And that's what I found 100% of the time. There's some grief, some trauma, something like that we can identify. Now, there's a few that have multiple issues, like addictions to the internet because of their grief. They dive into that, or they're susceptible to social contagion, which is huge. But even the people who engage in this as a social contagion, when I work with them, I've worked with them as young as 10, and you find out that it was stuff, the social contagion had something else to do with, in this one case, with moving. They were traumatized by moving. They had this network where they were for 10 years, and they were uprooted and moved to place, didn't have any network, and the kid at 10 years old was falling apart.
Wow.
And so that was trauma. The move was a traumatic event. And sometimes those things get lost in this discussion. We're looking more for getting hit with a baseball bat or something as trauma, but it's oftentimes much more subtle. So I just find it so interesting that we as people who love the Lord Jesus Christ, I keep using the language that is not of Jesus, because if we're to be of Jesus, there are no transgenders. There are people who identify as a transgender, but they aren't transgender. So I'm not going to call them transgender. There are people who say they transitioned, but not one person in all of world history has ever transitioned from one gender to the other. So let's stop that nonsense. And then gender dysphoria is not gender dysphoria. It's dysphoria of something else. And if we're going to help the poor sap, we need to find out what it is, because it's not about gender. I don't know why this is so simple, and yet people get upset with me when I want to help them. And because I can't help people if I'm stuck in the whole gender thing, because that's not the issue.
You just referenced, as followers of Jesus, you obviously are and have been for some time. What role did Jesus play in your restoration, dealing with all the stuff that you've shared about what was going on in your heart and leading you to the life you have now? I think I want to get specific about this because I think there are some in the church who may say, "Oh, just pray harder," and it's got to be deeper than that. It's more than just, okay, pray more. Would you share a bit about what that was like for you?
Yeah, Christians, I'm sorry, are guilty of putting a handle on the Bible and beating the crap out of people with it. And we need to stop it. And I mean, I had a guy sitting in front of me, reading out of the Bible, telling me everything I've done wrong in life. And he's an elder in a church. And when he got done, I looked at him and said, "Okay, so tell me where you drill a hole in that thing and stick a handle in it and beat me over the head with it. I don't think there's anything in there. You want to explain that to me?" And he was dumbfounded. And so I think when we understand that people who are traumatized, who are set in motion by something that happened to them, we need to show them love. They're suffering. They're suffering just like a cancer patient. How would you beat a cancer patient up with the Bible because he has cancer? No. We shouldn't be doing it to these individuals who suffered from something psychological. We have psychological, we have emotional, and we have physical illnesses, and you cannot beat people over their head with the Bible to cure them. It takes more than that. And so, as an example, as identifying as, I wanted to go to church. I wanted to connect with Jesus, even in the midst of my battle. Wow. And I went to a church in California, and I signed in as Laura in the church, all the girls surrounding the ladies and stuff, and I sat with them. And one of them happened to be the pastor's wife. She sat next to me, and I listened to the homily and all that stuff. And I went out and got the obligatory donut and coffee and got my car and went home and thought that, okay, that was a successful day. Later on that afternoon, the pastor, I saw him coming down my walkway, knocking on my door. And I thought, man, this guy's going to welcome me to the church, right? So I opened the door, and he didn't say anything except this. He said, "We don't want your kind in our church."
Oh, my.
And so actually I smiled. I actually thought this was like Saturday Night Live. This was like a good skit. So I started laughing, and I said, "Oh, really? What kind of people do you want in your church?" We're all broken. None of us are perfect. And so he turned around and left. So the next time I went to a church, I went to the pastor before I went to church and sat down with the pastor, and I said, "Are you going to try to change me? I'm transgender, struggling, whatever." And the pastor, Jeff, said, "No." He said, "My job is just to love you. It's God's job to change you." You see, that's the answer. We're not there to change people. We're there to listen to them. We're there to listen to their pain. We're there to help them navigate the trouble they've had. We're there to give them information that will help them come out of this. And so that's what I do. And to some people, it seems crude and harsh. But hey, guess what? Don't tell anybody. I get results.
That's the whole point. Loving people, talking about the truth. You've said that. We're going to get under the surface. We're going to deal with the real issues. While there has been in recent years and you've alluded to this, an enormous increase, especially in young girls, young women. You were a boy who was uncomfortable with your manhood because of the trauma you experienced. What, in your opinion, is the thing with the huge increase in young girls dealing with their gender? You've alluded to it, but I just want to give you a moment to specifically comment on that.
Yeah, one of the reasons that this has exploded this way is, as you well know, in 2013, they changed the diagnosis from identity disorder to gender dysphoria. That was deliberate because they didn't want anybody to feel bad about having a disorder. They still have a disorder, but they don't want you to feel bad about it. They don't want you to know it. And so, there was a book, Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria, which
Yep.
actually lit my hair on fire. I'm sorry, I'd like to sit in front of her and say that was a bad book. It was a bad title and you shouldn't have done it. I'll tell you why. That sounds harsh. Rapid Onset Social Contagion,
Mm.
because that's what it is.
Wow.
And again, taking dysphoria out of gender dysphoria out of the equation would have been very helpful in helping us navigate what the real issues are. Because I've worked with young people 10, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 20, all the way up to 20, and all the way to 70s. But when I spend time with them or working through the parent, we find out it was never about gender dysphoria. It was, I did it because my friends did it, or I saw, something online in a chat room and I thought it was interesting. It was a cartoon thing. So I took on the identity of one of the transgender cartoon people and I share that with my friends on the internet. So that's not gender dysphoria. That's just, so I don't, that's the biggest issue I have, is getting people to focus on the fact this is not about gender. We shouldn't even be talking about gender. It's about distress. It's about their identity. But what caused it is really the issue, isn't it?
Yeah. I have wondered, and I want to be clear to our listeners, I don't have a scientific study to prove what I'm about to say, but I have wondered if the way women have been treated in our culture, in our world, and just the way women have been sexualized has impacted young girls' unconscious thoughts about what is it going to be like for me to try and live as a woman in this world, and I don't want to do that. So the solution presented by culture is, if you don't like what being a woman means, then the solution they offer is, okay, you're transgender, culture would say. Again, I don't have a study to say that, but I've wondered about that.
Yeah. Well, what I've found is that the girls who identify as men come from several different directions. One girl, there are several girls actually, but in one case I know very well, where the father beat the mother up frequently. And the girl looked at that and goes, I don't want to be a girl.
Right.
Period. Right? It had nothing to do with gender dysphoria. I just don't want to be a girl because men will beat you up.
Wow. Yeah.
I've had girls tell me that they wanted to be a man, and I've had boys tell me the same thing. Boys will say, I wanted to be a female, not because, let me get this right. They tell me they want to cut their genitals off because people have been touching them inappropriately, and cutting them off was a defense mechanism against being sexually abused. Same is true for the female who is sexually abused. If grows a beard, looks offensive to somebody who might want to sexually abuse them, nobody's going to abuse them anymore because they look so different. Yeah. So they feel like that is their protection against being abused. I do think that this collection of girls who go together is, if you look at society, women do things together. If you take a women's ministry in church, there's 9,000 of them, right? They come down, they have lunch, and they're all over the place, right? Men's ministry, you could put in a closet, the 4 or 5 guys, and that's it. So it's totally different. Women do things together in large numbers. Men, not so much. They're a little bit more private. They're a little bit more ashamed, probably, of their behavior. And so I think it's a thing where girls, we see 4 or 5 of them going to Planned Parenthood to get hormones together.
Yeah.
So this is the social contagion, a much better word than, more accurate than gender dysphoria. Social contagion, internet indoctrination, and early childhood issues. Now, for me, I didn't give you a clear answer of what happened with me with Jesus, but as I went to the churches and began with the pastor who said, my job is to love you, God's job to change you. He hooked me up with a therapist that went to the church, and the guy gave me his home phone number. He said, anytime you want a therapy session up to 10 o'clock at night, call me, I'll meet you in the office.
Wow.
Any day of the week. So, and for free. and he did it for years. And so I took advantage of that many times, sometimes 9 in the morning, sometimes it was 10 at night. And he just sat there. And it was not, he didn't use a rubber hose. He just let me talk. And he'd give me some feedback. And I realized that just regurgitating all this stuff was becoming very helpful to me. And so I was going through alcohol recovery and working on my 4th step. And I had another Christian therapist I was working with. And I went and did my 4th step, which is anybody listening knows it's a big involved thing. And our session went on for a couple of hours or more. And at the end of the session, I was tired. I mean, I was drained from going through all the trauma and everything. And he said, let's pray. And to be honest with you, I didn't want to pray. I was like worn out. And I also knew that he was somebody who prayed for a long time. And I thought, I'm going to miss sleep and miss my favorite shows and not get home until midnight if he started praying. So I thought, well, he's been nice. I'll relent and let him pray. And so we were outside getting ready to leave and went back to his office, and he started praying. And he was praying and he was praying and he was praying. And then I didn't hear him anymore. And during that prayer that I didn't want to have, the Lord Jesus came to me.
Wow.
And he came, and I saw him coming down, and in front of me was a little baby. And I looked at the baby and I realized that was me. He's coming for me as a baby.
Wow.
And he picked the baby up, put him in his arms, and looked me in the eyes, and he said, you are now safe with me forever. And he disappeared. So he came to redeem and restore my life. Now, I still had hurdles to go over, but I knew where I could put them. And so I just finished co-writing a feature film this week called Who Am I? And it depicts my life story. And I'm hoping to have the opportunity to get it up on the big screen. I'm working with Sean Sorgosi of Ascend Pictures in California. And so we're very excited about the opportunity to bring it to the big screen, to show people that the power of prayer, even when you don't want to have it, can redeem your life.
Wow, Walt, I didn't know that. And God willing, that will be just who you are, and your story and who you have become is such a testimony. I'd like to ask you to comment on 2 other things.
Sure.
Before we end. There may be someone who is dealing with some of the issues you've talked about.
Sure.
But I think more likely the people that we are talking to are parents, are church leaders, maybe Sunday school teachers, maybe teachers in a school, and they know and love and care about some or perhaps many who are struggling with the kinds of things we've been talking about.
Sure.
What might you say to people in that situation who know and love and care about someone who's struggling like this?
Yeah, well, I think it's important for no matter who you are, pastor, friend, prayer partner, to explain that nobody in world history has ever changed their gender, and your son or daughter is not going to change their gender either. And that what's important is to understand that at conception, everybody is formed and by God and to serve a purpose for God. And it's this whole terminology that people hear and get confused by is, what gender were you assigned at birth? It's never happened in world history either. Your gender is not assigned at birth. It's innate and fixed at conception, 9 months before you're born. So we need to give people information that they can trust, that's truthful. God's design of man and woman does not include cutting off body parts and filling yourself with hormones so you can identify as a different person. So that, just knowing that, we need to sit down and ask them, what happened that caused you to not like who you are? Where did this information come from?
Yeah.
And I ask anybody to sit down at a coffee shop, spend time with the person. Don't be judgmental. Be a listener. Listen to what they're talking about. Find out how they got there. Because once you find out how they got there, then you can actually deal with how to help them not stay there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Listen, be with them. That's good.
Yeah.
And one more thing.
Sure.
You are one who walked through this journey, some would say regret, and there is now talk about those who have gone through the hormones and surgery who now regret the process, and there's kind of a not well talked about but growing, if I can say, movement of those, and that's some who you minister to especially. Would you just talk for a minute about the number who do regret? And I was looking a bit at your resources. The percentage is much higher than most people realize, apparently, and maybe give some hope for someone who may have, quotes, transitioned, air quotes, and wants to now embrace the identity that God created them with.
Yeah. Well, it's important for the listeners that are hearing me and you talk right now, is that of the thousands of people that I've worked with, including myself, we have never been counted as regretters or detransitioners and never will be. That's how you keep the number low. There is no database for counting people. So they can make up any number they want. The fact of the matter is, if you want to have, the people want to have a little glimpse, you can go to the Reddit site r/dtrans. There's over 50,000 of them on one site. So I would say that we know that they lose 90% of the people who've gone through this with hormones and surgery are lost and are unaccounted for in research.
Wow.
90%. So the numbers are coming out of, and this is a study done in a book that costs $250. I mean, it's a big, huge research book. So it's not some fly-by-night thing. This is actually done by people on the advocate side, and they admit that they've lost 90% of the people because either they've died by suicide, they've regretted it, they've detransitioned, they no longer identify, they're disappearing. So if you realize that the data that they're giving you about success comes from 10% of the population, then you've got a pretty good idea what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
So I would, everybody who contacts me, 100% of them have regret. And there are thousands.
Wow.
From 3 weeks after surgery to 40 years after surgery. 3 weeks to 40 years, and everywhere in between.
Wow. Well, you in your person, in your ministry, and God willing, in your story, is hopefully it does get told on the big screen as you referenced, are certainly a testimony that you are allowing God to use in showing some of the truth and in helping people who have struggled and been harmed in some of the ways you've described to see the restoration Jesus has to give. Walt, I feel like we've only scratched the surface. I feel like there's so much more that could be talked about. We're certainly going to have links to the sites that you mentioned. We'll have those links under this video if you're watching, in the show notes if you're listening. You've written a number of books. We're going to link to a couple of them as well. Just a huge thank you and blessings that even in this season of life, you are still making such a great impact.
Yep. Thank you. Well, I appreciate you having me on, and people can make donations. We help everybody for free. We've been doing this as a charity and never charged anybody a dime for almost 13 years. So your contributions are certainly appreciated.
And I want to second that. Absolutely, friends.
Right.
Walt is the real deal. Thank you. Blessings to you.
Thank you very much.
If you know or love or care about someone who is struggling with these issues, check the links. Perhaps you are. Check the links under this video. We have links to Walt Heyer's website, and then the Heyer Institute, slexchangeregret.com, but the Heyer Institute, Heyer. Check those links. We also have a link to the book where Walt shares his story, and to Transgendered Lives, one of his books on Amazon, where he shares stories of, I believe it's something like 40 individuals who have walked through this journey, and what their stories share. He's written a lot of other books as well. I really think it will be fruitful for you to check that out. I also want to remind you that my recent book, Sexpectations, Reframing Your Good and Not So Good Stories About God, Love, and Relationships, it is just still fresh out there in the world. Just in the last few weeks, I have been getting some excellent response from people who have listened to the audiobook or read the physical book or ebook. This helps you deal with the parts of your story. Some may be good, but some that are very not so good, especially around sexuality and intimacy, and what it looks like to invite Jesus into your story. So do check that out. We'll have the link to the Sexpectations book. And I also invite you to check out yoursexpectations.com, our website, where we talk more about this particular book and have a number of other resources available. You can get the first chapter free. We've got a quiz there. We've got a devotional there. We've got some free PDF downloads there. If you are struggling with issues around sexuality and so on. Thank you again for being with me on this program. Why don't you tell somebody else about our channel, and make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you again next time. God bless you.